Welcome to Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Weldin. Today's story is called Duckbill's Due, an original story written for you by Daniel Hinds. Thanks! Enjoy the episode! Duckbill's Due. The sky was blue, the air was cool, and the crowd was cheering. But not for me. Not yet, at least. I was flying at another air show on the California coast. After my last job went south, it seemed wise to do likewise and leave Canada for a while. Lovely as the Mounties are, they're like the mountains themselves. Hard cases, better seen from a distance. "Thank you, folks, and what a lovely day for flying!" came the airshow announcer's voice over my headphones. I was cruising at a few thousand feet high a few miles away, sitting at the controls of my trusty plane, the Duckbill's Due. It was a recovered and Frankensteined DHC-2, meant to be piloted in the backcountry bush. A good pilot could land it just about anywhere, be it a runway, a dirt road, or a choppy stretch of river surrounded by 1,000 gawking onlookers. "Next up," the announcer continued, "we have a special treat for you. We have Mallory, Mallard McCoy coming in for a river landing in his plane, the Duckbill's Due. Watch as this classic airplane, fitted with amphibious floats, lands on a stretch of river no more than a few hundred yards across. It's a feat only a madman or an ace pilot would attempt, and today we'll see if Mallard is cool or just plain crazy." I knew my cue. After all, I wrote it myself. I hit the throttle and the duck picked up speed, propeller purring like a jungle cat had a baby with a Harley-Davidson. Ahead and far below, I could see the churning blur of the crowd gathered on the edge of the river. I dropped the nose and dove towards them, watching them shrink and scream in excitement as I pulled up at the last moment, buzzing maybe 100 feet overhead and giving them a good look at the underside of the plane. "Seems like Mallard and the duck came in to say hello," laughed the announcer. "And now he's circling around for the landing. But wait, the angle is a little steep." I did a loop and came in low again. Instead of aiming the long way down the river, which anyone could do, I aimed across it the short way. There, the river was maybe 300 feet wide before it ended at the sandy bank where the crowd was gathered. "Mallard, what are you doing?" "Putting on a show," I said, my voice carrying through my mic and onto the loudspeakers below. The crowd whooped and cheered and backed away. I cut the engine entirely and went full flaps, the wide wings of the duck catching the air and slowing us down as I angled the nose up for a landing. We came in gently as a floating leaf, kissing the river once, twice, and then settling into the water with a great spray of silver wake. The shore was approaching fast, and with the engine cut, I could actually hear the shouts now. But I knew my business. The duck coasted up to the sandy beach and came to a gentle stop on the shore. I cracked open the door and leaned out. "Hey," I shouted, "someone looking for a madman?" The crowd laughed and erupted in applause. I waved and jumped down onto the beach, walking over to the announcer while the crowd took pictures of the Duckbill's Due in all her patchwork glory. She'd been cobbled together from a couple different junkyards, but she had a good coat of green paint, and the nose was done in duckbill yellow. It was basically a lipstick on a pig scenario, but when pigs could fly, all bets were off. "Fine flying," said the announcer, clasping my hand. He was an old-timer named Dodds, who had earned his wings in the Navy. Joining the military wasn't for me, mostly since I'm not a fan of being told what to do, never mind how to do it, but Dodds was an all-right guy for a squid-turned-brown shoe. "Duck does most of the work," I said, like the great and humble heck of a guy I am. "I just point her in the right direction." "I'd say I do a sight more than that." "Does that mean I'm getting a raise?" "Yeah," said Dodds. "You get a raise when you get in the plane. You raise right up into the sky." "Huh. Funnier every time," I said. The air show wasn't paying me much, But they kept the duck fueled and flying, so it was a good deal to relax and fill some time. Dodds got pulled off to go back to announcing, and I made my way back to my plane. The crowd had mostly trickled away, off to watch the next stunt, but there was an older woman lingering behind. She had long silver hair and a purse that cost more than I'd make in a year, even if I sold a few of the organs I wasn't using. "Hello, ma'am," I said, coming over and resting my hand on the duck. "I don't usually do autographs, but I guess I can make an exception." She smiled at me and did a quick look around. It was the kind of look I recognized all too well, the kind of look that meant, "Hey, I'm about to talk about some sketchy stuff, so be cool." "I don't want an autograph, Mr. McCoy." "Mallard is fine. Mal, if you aren't into the whole duck theme." "Listen, I need a pilot for a job, but it's not, well, is there somewhere we can talk in private?" Intrigued, I led her to the Airstream trailer they had set up for me. We sat at the little fake wood table inside. "You want something to drink?" I asked. "Do you have any sparkling water?" "I have instant coffee and a gallon of tap water." "Oh, nothing for me then, thank you," she said, taking her seat at the table. She brushed away the dirt and crumbs before she sat down, and I pretended not to notice. Pouring myself a coffee, I took the seat across from her. "So, here we are," I said. "What kind of job did you have in mind?" I was hoping the answer was something easy that paid well. Maybe ferrying her and some equally rich friends to someplace remote for a secret party, or maybe just swinging her down through Los Angeles so she could grab a burger at the In-N-Out. In my limited experience, rich people are weird when it comes to their privacy. "I need help getting my baby back." I nearly spit out my coffee. I clenched my jaw to keep it in and ended up choking instead. She watched in alarm as I sputtered for a minute and eventually regained my composure. "Just call me Mr. Cool." "Your baby," I said. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Smith," she replied, giving me what was obviously a fake name. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Smith, but that sounds like a job for the police. I don't get involved with kidnapping." "My baby is a Shih-Poo." "You kissed your mother with that mouth?" "A Shih-Poo is a dog, Mr. McCoy. A small and fragile dog. Mine is named Baby, and she's the light of my life. She was stolen by a Mr. Cabot, a rival of my husband's. He swears he doesn't have her, but I went to his mansion in the hills and I could hear my baby barking in the backyard. I tried to get her, but the whole place is gated off and watched by private security." Listen, I love dogs as much as the next guy," I said, "but I really don't think I can help you." "I'm sorry, but our mutual friend Maria said that you're the man for the job." "Maria?" I asked, and then it hit me. "Maria from the diner?" "Yes, that's her." "Maria talks too much. Next time I'm eating at Denny's." "She said you've told her about your past and that you're the only one crazy enough to help me." The past is in the past. Right now, I'm living in the right now." "Please, Mr. McCoy, I have a plan of sorts, and of course I can pay." "I really don't think—" $50,000, she said. "Up front, and another 50 when the job is done." "Oh, well then," I said, suddenly feeling much more agreeable. "Why am I the man for the job?" "Okay. You see, the kidnapper has this duck pond." "A duck pond? Little on the nose, isn't it?" "Don't you mean on the bill?" she asked, with her first hint of a smile. "Oh, it'll definitely be on the bill," I said. "Now let's talk details." The next night, I was airborne in the Duckbills do, flying low and slow through the mountains and valleys of Southern California. So far as anyone official was concerned, I was just a private pilot flying a rich client on a joyride. In reality, I was about to attempt one of the most dangerous stunts I'd ever done in my entire life. Excitement and fear rolled around in my gut into one big mass that emerged as a resounding burp. "Charming," said Mrs. Smith from the seat next to me. "What can I say?" I said. "I'm a charming man." The duck could fit 8 people comfortably and more if they were friendly, but that night it was just me and my new employer. I had already pulled out all the passenger benches to keep the weight down for the air show, so she sat beside me in the co-pilot's chair under strict orders to not touch anything. Old planes have a lot of toggles and switches, and it brings out the kid in people who want to just start pushing them all. "Look, there's Cabot's place." She pointed out the window behind me, but I had already seen it. As far as California mansions went, it was about average, which is to say that it could house 100 people and camp out a few hundred more on the grounds. I had looked it up on Google Earth, but in person it was easier to see why Mrs. Smith had needed me for the job. The grounds were cut up with walls and hedges and terraced landscaping. The only clear stretch where someone could land was the duck pond, a maybe 300-foot irregular circle of muddy water kept full in spite of California's droughts and fire. "That pond looks smaller in person," she said. "Are you sure you can make the landing?" "I could set the duck down in a swimming pool," I said. It wasn't modest, but it was basically true. "The hard part is taking off again." "Are you still going to land?" "You still going to pay me?" "Of course." "Then buckle up." I circled out and lined up a clear approach to the pond. The house was on top of a hill for the view, so luckily there weren't many obstacles in the way. To keep a semblance of stealth, I cut the engine on the Duckbill's due. The plane went quiet and I hit the flaps, bringing us in so slow it's a wonder we didn't drop out of the sky. The mountains loomed suddenly in front of us. The mansion was a smear of bright lights against the midnight dark, the pond an inky pool among the shadows. "We aren't going to make it," Mrs. Smith said, clutching at her armrests. "Oh, we'll make it," I said, more sure than I felt. "We ace pilots never miss. Haven't you seen Top Gun?" She was going pale as the plane dropped fast enough to flip our stomachs. "You don't look like Tom Cruise," she said. "Oh, fighter pilots are all engine. They don't fly with the air, they dominate it. A real pilot swims with the winds and hops with the chop." I made it up, but I said it loud and it rhymed. You'd be surprised how often that works. She nodded and closed her eyes as I made the final approach on the pond. We were low, but I flared at the last second, and we floated in like a butterfly. I had a clear view of the mansion and the security guards at the gates, and then we were dropping, floating into the backyard. "Just like that," I said, and brought the duck down. Her floats kissed the water just once and sank in with a splash. We coasted to a stop in the middle of the pond, scaring up a cloud of actual ducks who went flapping and quacking into the night. "You actually did it," Mrs. Smith said. She was still a little shaky, but she opened her eyes and blinked out at the mansion. It was maybe a quarter-mile away from the sprawling grounds. "Like a duck to water," I said, breathing out my own sigh of relief. "I'm going to fire up the engines and spin us around to take off. You get the dog and be back here in 5. "I'm not sure where the dog even is. Outside, I think, but I might take longer than 5 minutes." I ignored her for a moment and started my takeoff checklist. "Mr. McCoy, Mallard, I can't guarantee 5 minutes." "Well," I said, "they probably noticed us already, and if they didn't, they certainly will when I fire up this engine. I don't want to leave you behind, but I want to get caught even less. So you'd better get running." I reached over and opened her door for her. "Well, swimming," I said. I'd landed in the center of the pond, and she'd have to cross through the muddy water to reach the shore. Mrs. Smith threw me another dirty look, and I could tell where she wanted me to swim. I thought she might refuse, but then we heard a distant bark. Then again, closer. "My baby!" she cried, jumping out of the plane and into the pond. She ruined some shoes that cost more than my engine, but the water was only a couple feet deep, so she managed to stagger to shore. In the distance, I saw bobbing flashlights heading our way from the mansion's front gate. "Baby!" Mrs. Smith cried. I watched her fall to her knees in the grass as a little white dog ran up and jumped into her arms. It was almost heartwarming until I saw the broad old man in the silk robe running in our direction. Cabot, I presumed. "Who is that? You can't be in my yard!" "And you can't steal my dog!" Mrs. Smith shouted back. Cabot smiled, the kind of smile that makes you feel like you need a shower after you see it. "I already did, and now you're trespassing. Looks like I'll be keeping the mutt, and you'll be going to jail." Well, I thought, this conversation isn't going anywhere productive. "Time to go!" I shouted, and then fired up the engine. The duck roared and rumbled to life as my hands flew across the controls. "What? Is that a plane? You can't land a plane here! Security! Security!" The distant flashlights picked up speed, beelining in our direction. Luckily, Mrs. Smith turned and ran back through the pond. She put the dog down in her seat and then climbed in after her. A second later, a rock thunked into my side of the plane. I turned to see Cabot winding up and throwing another rock. This one screeched off one of the duck's wings. He was yelling stuff I couldn't hear over the engines, but I could guess well enough. It was probably, "Come back here," or maybe, "No one takes what I've rightfully stolen," or maybe even a, "You won't get away with this." But getting away is what I do best. Mrs. Smith closed her door and I fired up the prop and banked hard, turning us in a wide arc that put most of the pond in front of us. Cabot was still screaming on the shore and the security was almost there. I didn't know what they'd be carrying, but I was pretty sure it would be something a little more threatening than pond rocks. "Hold on to your dogs," I said, throttling up as fast as the duck could handle. "This might be a real short trip." "I can't pay you if we crash, Mallard." "I'm keeping that in mind." The plane leapt forward and gained speed. 300 feet to take off. For comparison, your average passenger plane needs 10,000 feet, roughly 33 times what I had to work with. The edge of the pond got closer and closer, a steep bank and then a drop-off into the valley. If we hit the bank at speed, it would tear us apart and send us spinning to crash on the rocky hills below. I jammed the throttle and started pulling back on the yoke. The edge got closer and closer. Our speed surged, the engine bellowed, Mrs. Smith screamed, and the dog barked like crazy. "Take off, take off, take off," I chanted, adding my voice to the commotion. "We're going to crash!" Mrs. Smith screamed, just as the duck bounced up and didn't come down again. Suddenly, we were 10 feet in the air and gaining, the pond falling away behind us, a black pool ringed by angry men in flashlights. In seconds, the mansion was behind us and we were flying down the valley. "We didn't crash," she said. "I can't believe it." Baby added. I never doubted it, I lied, and slapped the wall of the Duckbill's do affectionately. I was a decent pilot, but she was a heck of a plane. We touched down back at the airfield an hour later. Mrs. Smith thanked me again and disappeared into a giant Cadillac before the prop stopped spinning. I was left with a hefty check, a hefty amount of dog mess in my cockpit, and a hefty desire to get out of Dodge for a while. I couldn't say that I was Mrs. Smith's biggest fan, but, well, her money put gas in the tank, coffee in the pot, and the duck and I are flying south for winter. What more could you ask for? The end. Thanks for listening!